Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz lately.
Hmm.
America's national debt.
Right.
You've probably heard the headlines, you know, $36 trillion,
Yeah.
a $2 trillion increase just this year.
Wow.
Isn't a number so big?
It's hard.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
To put it in perspective, that's like every single American suddenly having a $100,000 bill to pay.
Yeah.
So the big question we're diving into
Yeah.
is this a sign that America's heading for bankruptcy?
That's a great question and a really complex one.
Okay.
While the sheer size of the debt is certainly alarming,
Yeah.
it's important to look beyond the raw numbers.
Yeah.
To really understand the severity of the situation, we need to consider the debt to GDP ratio.
Okay.
This ratio compares the national debt to the country's gross domestic product,
Right.
which is essentially a measure of its overall economic output.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what does America's debt to GDP ratio look like right now?
Right.
And what does that tell us about the country's financial health?
So currently, the U.S. debt to GDP ratio is sitting at 125%.
Okay.
To put that in context, a healthy ratio is generally considered to be below 60%,
Oh, wow.
and projections indicate this could hit a staggering 200% in the coming years.
Wow.
So a high debt to GDP ratio like this is a major red flag.
Yeah.
It signals that the country is borrowing heavily to sustain its spending,
Okay.
and it raises serious concerns about its ability to repay its debts in the long run.
So it's not just about the total amount of debt,
Right.
but about the country's ability to manage and repay that debt relative to its economic output.
Exactly.
What happens if this ratio keeps climbing? What are the real-world consequences for everyday Americans?
That's the crucial point. This
Yeah.
isn't just some abstract economic concept.
Right.
It has very tangible consequences for all of us.
Okay.
As the debt to GDP ratio rises,
Yeah.
so does the cost of servicing that debt.
Oh.
We're talking about the interest payments the government has to make on all that borrowed money.
Okay.
Right now, those interest payments are over $1 billion per day.
Wow.
And that number is only going to increase as interest rates rise.
$1 billion a day just in interest.
Just in interest.
That's a staggering amount of money.
It is.
And you mentioned rising interest rates.
Right.
How do those factor into the equation?
Yeah, so think of it this way as the U.S. government borrows more and more money.
Okay.
It becomes a riskier borrower in the eyes of lenders.
Makes sense.
To compensate for that risk, lenders demand higher interest rates.
Okay.
And those higher interest rates have a ripple effect throughout the entire economy.
Okay.
It becomes more expensive for businesses to invest,
Hmm.
for consumers to take out loans for things like cars and homes,
Yeah.
and even for the government itself to finance its operations.
Oh, wow.
It's a vicious cycle that can lead to slower economic growth and reduced opportunities for everyone.
Yeah.
As Shai Akabas from the Bipartisan Policy Center has warned,
Okay.
the current level of debt is driving up interest rates, including mortgages, and raising living costs for households.
Wow.
This will dampen economic growth and reduce opportunities for future generations.
It sounds like a ticking time bomb,
Yeah.
with rising interest rates acting as the fuse.
Hmm.
And speaking of people sounding the alarm,
Yeah.
Elon Musk has been quite vocal about his concerns, hasn't he?
He has.
He's even gone so far as to say that the U.S. is heading for bankruptcy super fast.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying that.
So,
Yeah.
and he's not just talking the talk, he's actually taking a hands-on approach
Right.
by co-heading President Trump's newly formed Department of Government Efficiency.
Yes.
Or DOGE, as it's being called.
DOGE.
Huh.
Okay, I have to admit that name is a bit unexpected.
Yeah.
But putting the memes aside for a moment,
Right.
what exactly is DOGE supposed to do?
So DOGE has been tasked with a pretty ambitious goal
Okay.
to cut government spending by at least $2 trillion.
Wow. They're looking to identify and eliminate waste, streamline bureaucracy,
Okay.
and essentially make the government run more efficiently.
Hmm.
Musk has been very clear about his view that government spending is essentially a form of taxation,
Right.
stating your money is being wasted and the Department of Government Efficiency is going to fix that.
$2 trillion in cuts.
At least.
That's a massive undertaking.
It is a huge undertaking.
I can only imagine the debates and pushback that's going to generate.
For sure.
Where are they even planning to make these cuts?
That's the million-dollar question,
Yeah.
and one that's generating a lot of speculation and anxiety.
Right.
There's been talk of everything from reducing funding for certain public programs and advocacy groups
Yeah.
to potentially scaling back some environmental initiatives.
I can already picture the political battles that are going to erupt over those proposals.
Absolutely.
But even if DOGE manages to find those cuts,
Yeah.
it raises another question. How does this focus on slashing spending align with President Trump's other policy goals?
Right.
Specifically, what about his promises of tax cuts?
That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
The Trump administration is facing a tricky balancing act here.
Yeah.
On the one hand, they're trying to rein in the national debt and reduce government spending.
Right.
But on the other hand, they're also committed to implementing tax cuts,
Right.
which could potentially decrease government revenue and further exacerbate the deficit.
So it's a potential clash between fiscal responsibility and campaign promises.
In a way, yeah.
How are economists and policymakers viewing this dilemma?
There's definitely a lot of concern and debate surrounding this issue. Some experts argue that further tax cuts, especially for high-income earners,
Yeah.
would be fiscally irresponsible at a time when the national debt is already at such a precarious level.
Okay.
Jessica Fulton of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies put it bluntly, further tax cuts for high-income groups will increase the deficit at a time when fiscal discipline is urgently needed.
So we've got a pretty complex picture emerging here.
It is complex.
A massive national debt,
Right.
rising interest rates that are impacting everyone's wallet.
Absolutely.
Elon Musk leading the charge to slash government spending,
Yeah.
and President Trump trying to balance those efforts with his own promises of tax cuts.
It's a tough situation.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
So
Yeah.
it raises some fundamental questions about America's economic future.
Definitely.
What are the long-term consequences of this debt burden?
Right.
What are the potential solutions? And what are the trade-offs involved?
Those are all important questions.
Those are the questions we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive into this critical issue.
Looking forward to it.
And we're back, continuing our deep dive into America's debt dilemma. Before the break, we were talking about the economic and political tightrope walk the country seems to be facing.
Yeah, it's a tough situation.
It's not just about numbers. It's about priorities,
Right.
ideologies, and ultimately the kind of future we're shaping.
Exactly. This issue goes far beyond just balancing a budget, you know?
Right.
It touches on fundamental questions about the role of government,
Okay.
economic fairness, and how we prioritize investments in our future.
Yeah.
And as you might expect, those questions are fueling some pretty intense political debates.
That's definitely been clear from the headlines.
For sure.
It seems like every day there's another clash between Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah.
Over spending cuts versus tax cuts.
It's a constant battle.
It's like they're speaking different languages.
It often feels that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And in a sense, they are.
Okay.
These debates reflect deeply ingrained beliefs about how the economy works
Okay.
and what the government's responsibilities should be.
Right.
On one side, you have those who advocate for smaller government,
Okay.
lower taxes, and a belief that the private sector is the primary driver of economic growth.
Oh.
On the other side, you have those who support a more active role for government
Okay.
in providing social safety nets,
Yeah.
investing in public goods like infrastructure and education,
Right.
and regulating the economy to protect consumers and the environment.
So it's a clash of philosophies, not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Exactly.
And it seems like that ideological divide makes it incredibly challenging to find common ground
It does.
and agree on solutions.
Absolutely. We're seeing a level of political polarization
Yeah.
that makes compromise and collaboration incredibly difficult.
Right.
And that gridlock has real consequences.
Okay.
The longer we delay in addressing the debt issue, the more difficult and painful the solutions are likely to become.
So is there any hope for breaking through this gridlock?
That's a tough one.
Are there any voices calling for a more balanced and collaborative approach?
There are, and it's encouraging to see those voices emerging. Shai Abbas, who we mentioned earlier from the Bipartisan Policy Center,
Right.
has been a strong advocate for a more nuanced approach.
Okay.
He argues for a combination of spending reforms and revenue increases,
Okay.
recognizing that both sides need to make concessions to achieve a sustainable solution.
That sounds like a reasonable approach.
It does.
But is anyone in power actually listening?
Well,
Is there any indication that policymakers are willing to move beyond the partisan rhetoric
yeah.
and find some middle ground?
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But there are some glimmers of hope.
Okay.
While President Trump has remained committed to his campaign promises of reducing costs for the American people,
Right.
he also seems to understand the gravity of the debt situation.
Okay.
There have been reports that his administration is exploring a range of options.
Okay. Like what?
Including potential cuts to certain environmental programs
Mhm.
and a reevaluation of some aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act.
I can imagine those proposals are generating a lot of pushback,
Oh, absolutely.
especially from environmental groups
Of course.
and those who see the Inflation Reduction Act as a crucial step towards addressing climate change.
Yeah, there are a lot of strong opinions on that.
You're absolutely right. Any attempt to cut spending on those fronts is going to face fierce opposition.
For sure.
There are valid concerns about the potential environmental and social consequences of such cuts,
Right.
as well as the political and legal battles they could trigger.
Absolutely. It's a complicated issue.
It feels like we're navigating a minefield here.
Yeah.
Every potential solution seems to come with its own set of challenges
Mm.
and unintended consequences.
That's the nature of complex problems, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There are no easy answers or quick fixes.
Right.
It's a matter of carefully weighing the options,
Okay.
understanding the trade-offs, and finding a path that balances competing priorities while minimizing harm.
So given all this complexity and uncertainty,
Right.
what does the future hold for America's debt?
Well,
Is there a way out of this mess?
yeah.
Or are we headed for an economic reckoning?
It's difficult to predict the future with certainty.
Yeah.
But one thing is clear. The choices made in the coming months and years
Okay.
will have a profound impact on the country's trajectory. It's a defining moment for America,
Yeah.
and the world is watching closely to see how this unfolds.
It sounds like a pivotal moment in history,
It really is.
with high stakes and no easy answers.
Absolutely.
Before we delve into the potential consequences of inaction
Okay.
and explore possible solutions,
Right.
let's take a moment to pause and reflect. What are your initial thoughts on all of this? What resonates with you the most? What are your hopes and fears for America's economic future? Share your thoughts in the comments below and join us for the final part of this deep dive as we explore the potential consequences of America's debt crisis and search for possible solutions.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been unpacking the heavy topic of America's debt crisis, and now it's time to really grapple with the potential consequences if it's not addressed effectively.
Right.
We've talked about the economic and political tightrope walk,
Right.
the clashing ideologies,
Yeah.
and the looming sense of urgency. But what does it all mean for the average American?
Right.
What happens if we just stay on this course?
That's the critical course that we need to confront.
Yeah.
While it's tempting to just focus on abstract numbers and economic jargon,
Right.
it's crucial to remember that this crisis has real human consequences.
Right.
The longer we delay in finding solutions, the more those consequences will be felt by individuals,
Yeah.
families,
Okay.
and communities across the country.
So let's try to paint a picture of what that future might look like.
Okay.
What are the tangible impacts of a growing national debt on everyday Americans?
So imagine a scenario where the cost of servicing the debt,
Okay.
those ever-increasing interest payments,
Right.
consumes a larger and larger portion of the federal budget. This leaves less and less funding available for essential services like education, healthcare, and infrastructure.
Okay.
It means fewer resources for research and development, for environmental protection, and for social safety net programs that millions of Americans rely on.
It's like trying to keep a house running while the mortgage payments keep going up and up.
Exactly.
Keeping less money for groceries, repairs, and everything else.
Right.
Eventually, something has to give.
Exactly. And those cuts have very real consequences.
Right.
They could lead to a decline in the quality of education,
Okay.
longer wait times for healthcare, and a deterioration of roads, bridges, and other vital infrastructure. It could mean fewer job opportunities,
Wow.
slower economic growth, and a decline in overall living standards.
Right.
And as the government's ability to invest in the future diminishes,
Okay.
so does the country's ability to compete globally and maintain its position as a world leader.
It's a pretty sobering picture, to say the least.
It is.
But surely there are people working on solutions, right?
Well, everyone's trying.
We've discussed Elon Musk's ambitious plans with DOGE,
Right.
but what other options are on the table? What are economists and policymakers suggesting as ways out of this debt dilemma?
Well, there are a range of potential solutions being debated,
Okay.
but they all come with their own set of challenges and trade-offs.
Right.
Some economists advocate for a combination of spending cuts and revenue increases.
Right.
This could involve raising taxes, particularly on corporations and high-income individuals,
Okay.
closing tax loopholes that allow wealthy individuals and corporations to avoid paying their fair share,
Good.
and reforming entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare to ensure their long-term solvency.
I could already hear the pushback from both sides of the aisle.
I know.
No one likes the idea of higher taxes or cuts to programs they rely on.
Yeah, it's a tough situation.
It seems like a political minefield.
You're absolutely right. Finding a politically palatable solution is perhaps the biggest challenge of all.
Yeah.
It requires compromise, a willingness to put aside partisan differences
Right.
and focus on the long-term well-being of the country.
Okay.
It requires a recognition that tough choices need to be made and that shared sacrifice will be necessary to steer America back onto a fiscally sustainable path.
It's a tall order, especially in today's polarized political climate.
It is.
But what happens if we just fail to make those tough choices? What are the risks of inaction?
Mm-hmm.
Could America actually go bankrupt?
So while a full-blown bankruptcy where the U.S. simply defaults on its debts
Right.
is considered unlikely,
Okay.
it's not entirely impossible.
Okay.
A more probable scenario is a gradual erosion of economic strength and global standing.
Hmm.
Think of it as a slow-burning crisis, a creeping decline that gradually chips away at America's prosperity and influence
Okay.
as the debt burden grows.
Yeah.
So does the risk of economic instability,
Okay.
inflation, and a loss of confidence in the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency.
It sounds like we're standing at a crossroads.
Yeah.
Facing a choice between two futures. One path leads to a gradual decline, a slow unraveling of the American dream.
Right.
The other requires facing our challenges head-on, making difficult decisions,
Absolutely.
and embracing shared sacrifice to build a more sustainable and prosperous future.
That's a powerful way to frame it.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of informed civic engagement.
Okay.
It's crucial for citizens to understand the complexities of this issue,
Right.
to engage in thoughtful dialogue, and to hold their elected officials accountable for making responsible decisions that prioritize the long-term well-being of the country.
This has been a truly eye-opening deep dive,
It has.
and I hope it sparks some insightful reflections for all of you listening.
Me too.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the sheer scale of the national debt
Right.
and the looming threat of rising interest rates
Yeah.
to the political battles over spending cuts, tax increases, and the role of government in addressing this crisis.
It's
But most importantly, we've tried to connect those abstract economic concepts to their real-world implications for everyday Americans.
Absolutely.
What are your key takeaways from all of this? What are your hopes and fears for America's economic future? What solutions resonate with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
Yes, please do.
And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more deep dives into the topics that matter. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking the tough questions.
Absolutely.